Danny Rourke grabbed his own leg and dragged it across the break room floor, exaggerating every stumble, every lurch, while the younger medics howled with laughter around him. Then he straightened up, smirked, and pointed down the hallway. "Here she comes, ready? Watch the hero walk." More laughter, louder this time. Sergeant Emma Fields, Bronze Star, combat medic. The woman who crawled 30 meters under enemy fire to keep 2 dying soldiers breathing, rounded the corner and heard every single word. Nobody stopped laughing. Nobody said a thing. She kept walking, head up, jaw locked, eyes straight ahead. They had no idea what was coming for them. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really began. The morning always started the same way for Emma Fields. 4:45 a.m. Alarm. No snooze. Feet on the cold floor before her eyes were even fully open. She'd sit there for just a second, one single second, and press her palm flat against her left thigh, feeling the deep, stubborn ache that lived there now like a tenant who had never been asked to leave. Then she'd breathe, stand up, and move. That was the thing about Emma. She always moved. She had been at Naval Medical Center San Diego for 14 months, transferred after her final deployment to Afghanistan ended the way nobody ever wanted a deployment to end. An IED, a roadside, a sound so loud it had no sound at all, just white, and then dirt, and then the sky tilted sideways and wouldn't stop tilting. She'd woken up in a field hospital with her left femur repaired by a surgeon she never got to thank. 3 operations and 18 months of physical therapy later, she walked. Not perfectly, not the way she used to, but she walked. The Army had given her a Bronze Star with valor. Her new colleagues had given her a nickname she was never meant to hear. The mess hall at 0600 was the loudest place on the base. All clanging trays and coffee cups and voices layered over each other like static. Emma moved through the line with her usual economy: eggs, black coffee, 1 piece of toast, and found a corner seat near the window. She didn't sit in the center of rooms anymore, not because she was ashamed, because she had learned the slow and painful way that the center of rooms had a price. Sergeant Fields, she looked up. Corporal Lisa Tran, 23 years old and still new enough to the hospital that she hadn't yet learned which smiles were real and which ones were weapons. "Morning, Tran." Lisa set her tray down across from Emma without asking. Emma noted that. Not everybody did that. Most people asked or pretended they saw someone else they needed to sit with. "You're doing the afternoon trauma rotation today, right?" Lisa asked, cutting into her eggs. "Same as every Tuesday." "I heard there's a new transfer coming in. Captain, Navy SEAL." Emma sipped her coffee. "I heard that too. Do you know anything about him?" "Only what's in the file." Lisa leaned in just a fraction, the way young people did when they were trying to decide if the person across from them could be trusted with something. "They say he's got a record that reads like a movie script. 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 to Syria, 2 silver stars." Emma set down her cup. "Then he's earned his rank." "Yeah," Lisa paused. "They're saying he specifically requested this posting. Nobody does that. This isn't exactly a coveted assignment." Emma looked at her for a moment. Maybe he's got his reasons. She didn't say what she was actually thinking, which was that she understood perfectly why someone might specifically request a place that other people didn't want. Sometimes the places nobody else wanted were the only places where you could actually breathe. Across the mess hall, she heard it before she saw it. That particular brand of laughter that young men use when they're performing for each other. She didn't look. She'd learned not to look because looking gave them an audience, and an audience gave them fuel. But Lisa looked, and Emma watched Lisa's expression change. The small, uncomfortable flicker of someone who didn't know what to do with what they were seeing. "Those guys are such," Lisa started. "Don't," Emma said quietly. But I know what they are. Emma picked up her fork. Eat your breakfast, Tran. The laughter grew louder for just a moment, and then it settled, and Emma finished her eggs without tasting them. She had saved 4 lives in a single afternoon. This was a fact. It was documented. It was in her service record in black ink, with a signature from a colonel who had seen more combat than most people would see in 3 lifetimes. On a dirt road outside Kandahar, with her unit pinned under fire, and 2 of her men bleeding out in the dust, Emma Fields had crawled, under active enemy fire, dragging a medical kit and her own body weight across 30 meters of exposed ground. And she had kept those men breathing until the medevac arrived. The IED had caught her on the return trip. She sometimes thought about the cruel geometry of that. The going out had been the dangerous part, the bullets, the exposure, the terrible open ground, and she had survived it. It was the coming back that had broken her leg in 4 places. But she didn't say any of this to anyone at this base. She didn't say it because she had learned, quickly and without much gentleness, that telling your story to people who hadn't earned it was like handing them a knife. Most of them didn't mean to cut you with it, but they did. The trauma bay that afternoon was controlled chaos, the particular kind that Emma had been trained to read like a language. 2 motor vehicle accident patients, 1 training injury, a suspected appendicitis that turned out to be real. She moved through it all with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, directing, assessing, her hands always knowing where to go before her brain had finished forming the thought. Fields, Charge Nurse Patterson appeared at her elbow, a broad-shouldered woman in her mid-50s who ran the trauma unit the way a ship captain ran a deck. Walk with me. They moved out into the corridor, away from the noise. How's your leg today? Patterson asked. Emma didn't miss a beat. Fine. Patterson gave her a long look. I'm asking because Dr. Harmon wants you on your feet for the next 6 hours, and I want to know if that's going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem. Patterson studied her for a moment, the way experienced people studied things they weren't quite sure they believed. Then she nodded once, sharply, the way she nodded at everything. Good. Also, heads up. The new transfer is arriving this afternoon, Captain Hayes. Command wants a full brief on our patient census and current capacity. Do you want me to prepare the briefing? I want Dr. Harmon to prepare it, but Harmon is in surgery until 4, so yes, I want you to prepare it. Emma nodded. I'll have it ready by 3. Patterson was already walking away. I know you will. She was at the nurse's station, deep in the patient files, when she first heard his voice. Not the words, just the sound of it. A voice that had the particular quality of someone who had spent years in environments where being heard clearly was not a courtesy, it was a matter of survival. Low, precise, no wasted syllables. She looked up. Captain Michael Hayes was standing at the end of the corridor, speaking with Patterson, and he was not what she had expected, though she realized, turning back to her files, that she hadn't actually expected anything specific. He was tall but not imposing. His face was the kind of face that had been worn in, the way good leather was worn in, not old exactly, but used, experienced. There were lines around his eyes that had been put there by sun and wind, and the particular squinting that came from years of scanning horizons that needed scanning. He was listening to Patterson more than he was talking, which Emma noticed immediately because men in his position rarely listened more than they talked. Patterson gestured down the corridor. Hayes nodded, and then his eyes moved, the way trained eyes always moved, sweeping the room in a single practiced arc. And for one brief second, they landed on Emma. She looked back at her files. She was not going to be the person who stared at the new captain, but she felt, with the particular accuracy of someone who had spent years reading rooms, that he had registered her, not in any significant way, just the way competent people registered all the moving pieces in a new environment. She was a piece. She had been registered. She went back to work. The briefing was at 3:15 in the small conference room off the main corridor. Emma had the charts prepared, the census numbers clean and organized, the capacity projections laid out in a format that any experienced officer would be able to read in under 2 minutes. She presented it the way she did everything, without decoration. The facts in order, with the context that was necessary, and no context that wasn't. Captain Hayes sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 junior officers whose names Emma didn't yet know. He asked 3 questions during the briefing. All 3 of them were good questions, the kind that told her he had actually read the preliminary file they'd sent him, and that he had been thinking about it. When she finished, he said, "Thank you, Sergeant. That's one of the cleaner briefings I've received since I transferred in." Emma said, "Thank you, sir," and that was the entirety of their first real interaction. It was enough. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she was not in the mess hall at 1700 hours that same evening, was what happened when Captain Hayes walked in for dinner. Private First Class Danny Rourke was at it again. He was holding court at a table near the center of the room, the way he always did, surrounded by the same 4 or 5 younger medics who treated his commentary like entertainment. Emma had left the hospital 20 minutes earlier, headed back to her quarters, her leg aching in the specific way it ached when she'd been on her feet for 6 hours straight. But her absence didn't stop Danny from making her the subject of conversation. "I'm just saying," Danny was saying, loud enough to carry, "if you're going to give out medals, shouldn't they go to people who can actually, I don't know, move properly? Like, what kind of army are we running here?" One of the others, a young woman named Carver who laughed at everything Danny said because she thought it made her look confident, snorted into her drink. "She does that thing where she kind of lists to the left, like a car with a flat tire." More laughter. "A flat tire," Danny repeated, delighted with it. "That's good, Carver. That's actually good." He did not see Captain Hayes come in. Most people in the mess hall did see him. Officers of Hayes's rank and reputation had a particular gravity that cleared a path, but Danny Rourke was too busy performing to notice the room's subtle shift. He was mid-sentence when the table across from him went quiet in a way that was different from the ordinary quiet of people eating. He looked up. Captain Hayes was standing 6 feet away, holding a tray, looking at Danny with an expression that was not angry, which was almost worse than anger. It was the expression of someone who had filed something away, something important, something they were going to deal with on their own terms, in their own time. Danny's mouth closed. "Carry on," Hayes said quietly, and he walked to a table in the far corner and ate his dinner alone. The mess hall took a few minutes to return to its normal volume, and when it did, Danny Rourke was significantly quieter than he had been before. But what happened in that mess hall later, 2 weeks from that evening, was something that nobody in that room would ever quite forget. The days settled into their rhythm. Emma reported at 0500. She worked her rotations. She prepared her paperwork with the same precision she brought to everything. She went back to her quarters. She did her physical therapy exercises in the small, private space of her room, the ones that had been prescribed 18 months ago and that she had never once skipped, because skipping them would have been an acknowledgement that the pain was winning. And she had decided, in the white aftermath of the explosion on that dirt road, that the pain was not going to win. She was aware that Captain Hayes was watching, not in any uncomfortable way, but in the way that a good commander watched everyone. She'd catch him in the periphery of a room, not looking at her directly, but with the posture of someone who was aware of her position relative to his own. She didn't know what to make of it. She tried not to make anything of it. But on a Thursday morning, 11 days after his arrival, something happened that she could not dismiss. She was at the supply cabinet, inventorying a new shipment of IV materials, when she heard it, the laughter, distinctive and purposeful, coming from the break room 2 doors down. Danny's voice doing an impression. She couldn't hear the exact words, but she didn't need to. She recognized the cadence of the joke, the slight, exaggerated rhythm of the footstep impression. Her hand stilled on the box she was holding. She put it down carefully. She walked toward the break room door. Not all the way, just far enough to hear clearly. Her back against the wall, her jaw tight. "And she's going to represent us in the field?" Danny's voice. "I mean, come on, half our medics could outrun her, even if they had a broken arm. What exactly is she bringing to the table at this point?" A pause. Someone said something she couldn't quite hear. Danny laughed. "Yeah, well, a medal is a medal. Doesn't mean she's not half a step away from being a liability." Liability. Emma stood with her back against the wall for 10 full seconds. She counted them. 1,000, 2 1,000. A technique she'd learned in her first year when she was trying to stop herself from saying things she would regret. Then she walked away. Back to the supply cabinet, back to the IV materials, back to her inventory sheet. She did not cry. She had not cried about any of this since the second month at the new base, when she had sat in her car in the parking lot for 11 minutes and let herself feel all of it, and then she had gotten out of the car and gone to work. But liability, the word sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She was still thinking about it 2 hours later when Lisa Tran appeared at her elbow. "Emma." Emma looked at her. Lisa's face was flushed. The particular flush of someone who had been carrying something uncomfortable and had finally decided to put it down. "I need to tell you something," Lisa said, "and I need you to not tell me it's fine and change the subject." Emma waited. "Rourke has been doing an impression of you in the break room. Like, an actual impression. The walk. He's been doing it for other people, and they've been laughing. And I didn't say anything at the time, and I should have said something, and Tran, I'm sorry, Tran." Emma's voice was steady, the way it always was. "I know." Lisa looked at her. "You know?" "I heard it, this morning." "Then why didn't you?" "Because my reaction is not what changes things in a room like that." Emma turned back to her work. "What changes things in a room like that is time and demonstrated performance. Those are the only two things that actually work." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "That's not fair." "No," Emma agreed simply. "It's not." She was wrong about one thing. She would find that out very soon. Time and demonstrated performance were not the only things that could change a room. Sometimes what changed a room was a single person with the courage to do what everyone else had been too careful, too comfortable, or too cowardly to do. But that came later. What came next, what nobody had anticipated, including Emma, was the training incident on a Friday afternoon that put 3 soldiers in the trauma bay simultaneously, with a 4th being airlifted in from the field, and Emma Field standing at the center of it all with her clipboard and her bad leg and her 14 years of combat medicine training, running the room with the kind of calm authority that turned chaos into procedure. Captain Hayes was in the hospital that afternoon for a routine medical appointment. He was not supposed to be in the trauma bay. But when you hear the word code called over a hospital intercom with that particular edge in the caller's voice, certain people move toward it rather than away from it. That was simply who they were. It was a quality that could not be manufactured or trained. It was either in you or it wasn't. Hayes was in the corridor outside the trauma bay when the doors swung open and Emma Fields came through them, moving fast, already talking. To Tran, to Patterson, to the orderlies flanking the first gurney, her voice cutting through the noise with the clean precision of someone who had done exactly this in conditions that made a hospital trauma bay look like a church picnic. "Tran, I need a blood pressure on bed 1, and I need it 30 seconds ago. Patterson, where is Dr. Harmon? Get him on the radio. I don't care if he's mid-suture. I need him in here. Someone tell me the status of the airlifted patient. ETA, vitals, what am I walking into?" She moved between the beds with that uneven gait of hers, the slight drag of the left leg that Danny Rourke had spent 2 weeks impersonating for his audience of 5. And there was nothing graceful about it, nothing cinematic. It was just motion, pure, purposeful, effective motion. Hayes watched from the corridor. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He stood there for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He would later know this precisely because he'd looked at his watch when he'd first stopped, a habit, and he watched Emma Fields do the thing she had been doing for 14 years, the thing that her body had been doing even when the ground beneath her had exploded, even when she'd woken up in a field hospital with her femur in pieces. She was saving people's lives. She was doing it right now, with her limp, with her clipboard, with her voice in her hands and the complete, unwavering architecture of everything she knew. When it was over, when the room had quieted into the slower rhythm of stabilization, Hayes turned and walked back down the corridor. He had made a decision. He was going to let it settle for a few days. He was going to wait for the right moment. Not because he needed more information. He had all the information he needed, but because he had learned, in 22 years of service, that the right moment was everything. Act too quickly and you created a scene. Wait for the right moment and you created something that lasted. He was a patient man. He was very, very patient. And in 9 days, in the mess hall of the Naval Medical Center San Diego, in front of every single person who had ever laughed at Emma Fields' uneven walk, Captain Michael Hayes was going to exercise that patience in a way that none of them would see coming. Emma went home that night and soaked her leg in warm water for 20 minutes, which was not in the PT protocol, but which worked better than half of what was. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, small, clean, the walls mostly bare except for a single framed photograph on the shelf near the window, and she thought about the afternoon. The 4 patients, the controlled chaos. The moment when the 4th gurney had come through the doors and she had seen immediately, from the positioning of the body and the way the paramedics were managing the airway, what she was dealing with, and she had known exactly what to do. She always knew what to do. That was the thing that nobody in this building seemed to understand. The limp didn't change what she knew. It didn't move anything around in her brain. The knowledge was still there, all of it, every bit of it, and it always would be. The photograph on the shelf was of her unit in Afghanistan. 12 people standing in the dust, squinting against the sun. She was second from the left, standing straight, both legs working correctly. She looked at that photograph the way you looked at something that belonged to a version of you that still existed somewhere. Not gone exactly, just living in a different room that you couldn't access anymore. She had saved 4 lives on the road outside Kandahar. She had saved at least 2 more this afternoon. She was not a liability. She pressed her hand against her thigh in the familiar way and looked at the photograph until the pain faded to its usual background level. And then she got up, made tea, and went to bed. 9 days from now, the world, at least the small, specific world of Naval Medical Center San Diego, was going to shift. She didn't know that yet, but she was about to find out. The 9 days Emma had spent telling herself it didn't matter were the longest 9 days of her life. Not because the mocking got worse. If anything, it got quieter after Hayes arrived, at least on the surface. Danny Rourke was smart enough to read a room when a room contained someone with 2 silver stars and the kind of stillness that made junior officers nervous. But quieter was not the same as gone. Quieter just meant it moved. It moved into lowered voices and sideways glances, and the particular silence that fell in a hallway when Emma walked through it. That one-beat pause before conversation resumed, like someone had pressed a button and then released it. She felt every single one of those pauses. She counted them the way you counted things that you were trying to convince yourself didn't add up to anything important. It was a Tuesday morning, day 10 since Hayes' arrival, when Lisa Tran found Emma in the supply corridor before rounds and said, quietly and without preamble, "I need you to know something's happening." Emma didn't look up from her inventory sheet. Define happening. Rourke, he cornered two of the newer transfer medics last night in the break room and told them, I'm quoting here, Emma, I'm actually quoting, that you were, quote, a feel-good story the Army keeps around for the optics, and that anyone who actually wanted to learn real trauma medicine should shadow someone else. The clipboard in Emma's hands did not move. Her face did not change. But something behind her eyes went very, very still. The way deep water went still right before something surfaced. Who told you that? She asked. Medic Park. He came to me this morning. He felt sick about it. He said he didn't laugh, but he didn't say anything either, and it was bothering him. Emma set the clipboard down. She pressed her fingers flat against the shelf in front of her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked the clipboard back up. Tell Park he doesn't owe me anything, she said. Emma, he's new. He's trying to find his footing. That's not his fight. Then whose fight is it? Lisa's voice cracked just slightly on the last word, the way young voices did when they've been holding something for too long. Because everyone keeps saying it's not their fight and somehow it just keeps being yours. Alone. Every single day. Emma looked at her then, really looked at her. The flushed cheeks, the tight jaw, the particular kind of anger that young people carried when they encountered an injustice they didn't yet have the tools to fix. She recognized it. She had worn that exact expression once, a long time ago, before the Army had taught her that anger without strategy was just noise. Go get ready for rounds, Emma said gently. I mean it. Thank you for telling me. Lisa held her gaze for a moment, then turned and walked away. Emma stood alone in the supply corridor for 45 seconds. Then she went to work. What she didn't see, because she was in the trauma bay at 0800 running a simulation drill with 3 of the newer medics, was the conversation happening simultaneously in the corridor outside Captain Hayes' temporary office. Patterson was talking. Hayes was listening. Those were their natural positions. Emma would have recognized, and Patterson never talked without purpose. I'm bringing it to you directly, Patterson said, because I'm done waiting for it to sort itself out. It's been 10 days and it's not sorting itself out. It's calcifying. Walk me through it, Hayes said. Rourke, private first class, 24 years old, been here 7 months, mediocre performance record, but the kind of social confidence that reads as competence if you don't look closely. He has built himself a small following among the junior medics, and he uses that following to make Sergeant Fields' life smaller every single day. Hayes said nothing. He was looking at a point just past Patterson's shoulder, not distracted, but processing. The formal channels? He asked. She hasn't used them. Why not? Patterson was quiet for a moment. Because she's been in the Army for 14 years, and she knows what happens to decorated female combat veterans who file complaints about younger male medics mocking their service injuries. She knows what story gets told. She's not willing to become that story. The silence between them had weight. She knows? Hayes asked. That you're here? Absolutely not, Patterson said. And if you tell her, I'll deny everything. For the first time since the conversation started, something shifted in Hayes' expression. Not a smile exactly, but the suggestion of one. The kind that lived at the corners of a person's face when they recognized something they respected. Understood, he said. Patterson turned to leave, then stopped. Without turning back around, she said, She ran that trauma bay last Friday like she was born in one. I've worked with combat medics for 26 years. She's among the best 3 I've ever seen. Whatever you're thinking about doing, make sure it's proportionate to that. She left. Hayes sat with that for a long time. The simulation drill ended at 09:15. Emma had run it 3 times, once at normal speed, once with a simulated equipment failure, once with 2 team members role-playing as unavailable. By the 3rd run, the 3 junior medics were moving through it with a precision that hadn't been there 90 minutes earlier. She dismissed them and was collecting the simulation materials when Medic First Class James Park appeared in the doorway. He was 22 years old and looked, at this particular moment, like someone who had spent the entire night rehearsing a conversation and was now terrified of actually having it. "Sergeant Fields," he said, "do you have a minute?" "I have about 4, she said, not unkindly. "Talk while I pack this up." He came into the room. He stood with his hands at his sides in the way of someone trying not to fidget and not entirely succeeding. "I wanted to apologize for last night. I should have—" "Park." She didn't stop packing. "Tran told me, you don't have to do this." "I think I do," he said. His voice was steadier than she expected. "I sat there and I listened to someone dismantle your reputation piece by piece, and I didn't say anything. And the reason I didn't say anything is because I didn't want to be the guy who made it weird. And I've been thinking about that all night, and I think that's exactly the problem. I think that's how it keeps going. Because of people like me deciding not to make it weird." Emma went still. She turned and looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she'd looked at Lisa earlier, but with something different in it this time. Something that recognized a specific quality of courage. The small kind, the everyday kind, the kind that didn't come with medals. "What's your specialty?" she asked. He blinked. "Ma'am?" "Your clinical specialty. What area are you training toward?" "Trauma, advanced trauma medicine." She studied him for a moment. Then she said, "Be in the trauma bay at 1400. I'll walk you through a full primary assessment protocol that isn't in any of the standard training manuals. It's field developed. It works better." He stared at her. "You?" Yes, ma'am, absolutely." She picked up the simulation kit and walked past him out the door. "And Park, ma'am, you made it weird just now, and it was the right call." She was gone before he could respond. The twist came from a direction nobody expected. Not from Danny Rourke, not from Hayes, not from anything that had been building in the obvious ways. It came from the base commander's office in the form of a memo distributed at 1100 hours to all department heads. Emma read hers standing at the nurse's station, and for the first time in 10 days, something cold moved through her chest that had nothing to do with Danny Rourke. The memo announced a formal field readiness assessment, a comprehensive evaluation of all medical personnel's ability to perform duties in austere field conditions. It was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Every medic on base would be evaluated. Mobility, response time, physical capacity, and clinical performance under simulated field stress. Mobility, response time, physical capacity. She read those 3 words twice, set the memo down, picked it up again. Patterson appeared beside her. "I saw it." "Is it standard?" Emma asked. Her voice came out completely neutral. She was proud of that. "It rotates through. We had one 18 months ago." Patterson paused. "Before you arrived. So I haven't done one here." "No." Emma set the memo down for the second time. "What are the mobility metrics?" "Depends on your assigned role. For trauma medics in a field support classification, the requirement is a 2-mile loaded carry in under 32 minutes. 2 miles. Loaded. 32 minutes. She did the math without meaning to. She did it the way you did math that you didn't want to do. Automatically, against your will, your brain running the numbers before your pride could stop it. Her current pace, on a good day, with her leg at a 7 out of 10, which was considered a good day, was approximately 17 minutes per mile unloaded. Loaded on field terrain, that number went up. How far up depended on the day, on the weather, on factors she couldn't entirely control. "Okay," she said. "Emma." I said, "Okay, Patterson." She picked up the clipboard that was never far from her hand. "I've got 3 hours before my afternoon rotation. Is the PT track open?" Patterson looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was not quite worry and not quite admiration, and was probably some combination of both that didn't have a clean name. "It's open," she said. She went to the track. She went to the track and she ran, or what passed for running, the particular motion she'd developed over 18 months that was not quite a run and not quite a walk, but was its own category of movement, one she'd built from scratch on a physical therapy mat in a hospital room in Germany, while a surgeon watched her with careful, professional optimism. She ran with 20 pounds in the pack on her back, because that was what the assessment required, and she kept a count in her head, pacing herself, monitoring her body the way she'd been trained to monitor her patients. All data, all information, nothing personal. She completed the 2 miles in 38 minutes and 40 seconds. She stood at the finish line of the empty track, breathing hard, her left leg reporting its displeasure in terms she understood completely, and she did the arithmetic again. 6 minutes and 40 seconds over the requirement, on a good day, in decent weather, without the actual stress variables of a field assessment. She was standing there running the numbers for the third time when she heard footsteps. She turned. Captain Hayes was walking toward her along the edge of the track. He wasn't in workout gear. He was in his duty uniform, which meant he hadn't planned to be here, which meant he had come specifically, which meant someone had told him. She made a rapid calculation about whether to be angry about that. She decided to wait and hear what he said first. He stopped about 6 feet from her. He looked at the track, then at her. He did not look at her leg. "How'd you do?" he asked. No preamble, no pretense of having been passing by. She respected that. 38:40, she said. He nodded slowly. Assessment requirement is 32. "I know what the requirement is, sir." A pause. Not uncomfortable. Hayes seemed to carry silence the way most people carried conversation, naturally and without effort. "What was your time on your last PT assessment, before Afghanistan?" She thought back. 26 minutes, 12 seconds. "So you've lost roughly 12 minutes. Roughly. And you've got 3 weeks. 22 days. He looked at the track again. "You didn't ask for help." "No, sir. You weren't going to." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "I was going to figure it out." "I know." He turned back to her, and his expression was direct and completely without condescension, the expression of a peer, not a superior deciding whether a subordinate warranted assistance. "I want you to hear something, and I want you to hear it as information, not as judgment." "Can you do that?" She held his gaze. "Yes, sir. The assessment has a medical accommodation provision. If a service member has a documented service-connected injury, they can request a modified evaluation standard. I checked the regulation this morning. You qualify." The silence that followed that statement was a particular kind of silence, the kind that arrived when something you had not been willing to name out loud got named out loud by someone else, in the open air, where you had to deal with it. "I know about the provision," she said carefully, "but you weren't going to request it." "No, sir." "Why not?" She took a breath, let it out. "Because Rourke has been calling me a liability for 2 weeks. Because half this base thinks I'm a feel-good story kept around for optics. If I request an accommodation on my first physical assessment here, every single one of them gets to feel like they were right." Hayes was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was level and matter-of-fact in a way that somehow made it more powerful than if he'd been impassioned. "That's not a reason to destroy your knee in 3 weeks." "No, sir, it's not." She met his eyes. "It's just the reason I'm going to do it anyway." Something moved in his face, something quick and deep that she almost missed. He nodded once. "Then let's talk about the 12 minutes. Timtem's a tune, then let's talk about the 12 minutes. The most of the 12 minutes. Then let's talk about the 12 minutes." What followed was not a montage. It was not inspirational in any cinematic sense. It was 22 days of early mornings and pain and adjustment, and the specific, unglamorous work of a person refusing to be reduced. Hayes showed up on day 1 with a physical therapist from the Naval Sports Medicine Unit, a civilian contractor named Dr. Reyes, who specialized in gait mechanics and load-bearing rehabilitation. Emma didn't ask how Hayes had arranged it. She suspected she didn't want to know what that conversation had looked like. Dr. Reyes watched her walk the track once, all the way around, and then said, "Okay, your mechanics are compensating wrong. You're overloading your right side to protect the left, and it's slowing you down by at least 4 minutes per mile." 4 minutes, Emma repeated. At least. If we correct the compensation pattern, the movement becomes more efficient. It won't be pain-free, I want to be clear about that, but it will be faster, and it will be better for the joint long-term. Emma looked at Hayes, who was standing off to the side with his arms crossed and his face neutral. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "Why did you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because watching someone with your service record get told they might not be fit for a clinical position in a hospital is one of the more absurd things I've encountered in 22 years of service. And I've encountered some genuinely absurd things." She almost smiled. She stopped it before it arrived, but it was close. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Run the track." She ran the track. Danny Rourke found out about the training sessions on day 4. He found out because the PT track was not invisible, and Hayes walking the perimeter while Emma worked with Dr. Reyes was not a subtle sight. By 0700 of day 4, it had traveled through the informal communications network of the base, which moved faster than any official channel, and by 0900, Danny was in the break room with his usual audience, reframing the narrative with the particular skill of someone who had been doing it their entire life. "It's a PR thing," he told Carver, who was eating a sandwich and listening with the focused attention she always gave to Danny's interpretations of events. "The captain's new. He needs to look good, so he picks the most sympathetic story on base and he attaches himself to it. It's optics." "You think he's using her?" Carver asked. "I think they're using each other," Danny said, with the confidence of someone who had never once considered that his reading of a situation might be incorrect. "She gets legitimacy. He gets a feel-good story to take back to command. Everybody wins. Except," he paused for effect, looking around at the small circle of faces watching him. "Nobody's actually asking the real question, which is what happens when she can't make the assessment time and they have to quietly reassign her and pretend the whole thing never happened." A voice came from the doorway. "That's an interesting theory." Every head turned. Medic First Class James Park was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and an expression that was entirely new to his face, something that had not been there 2 weeks ago, before Emma had taught him 4 hours of off-manual trauma protocol and told him he'd made the right call by making it weird. Danny looked at him with the mild surprise of someone who had not expected interruption from that direction. "Park, I've got a question," Park said. "Rourke, when did you do your combat rotation?" Danny's eyes narrowed slightly. "What?" "Your combat rotation. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, anywhere with actual incoming fire. When did you do yours?" The room was very quiet. "I'm still stateside," Danny said, his voice carrying just the smallest new edge. "Right, so you've never actually been in the field." "I've been in training." "Training," Park repeated. The word landed flat and final as a door closing. "Sergeant Fields has a Bronze Star with Valor. You know what that means? It means she did something under enemy fire that a reviewing board, people who have also been under enemy fire, looked at and said that action was above and beyond what any reasonable person could be expected to do. And you're in here, in this break room, calling her a liability." He pushed off the doorframe and picked up his coffee from the counter. "I'm not asking you to like her. I'm asking you to do the math on who in this room has actually earned the right to talk about what she is and isn't." He left. The silence he left behind was the densest silence the break room had produced in months. Danny said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone somewhere cold and internal, the place people went when they'd been called out in public and were deciding what to do about it. Carver was looking at her sandwich. 17% ever said. 75 numbers just to wares of the same country. Or at least even something such a list of the many cliff. And we know that 77 minutes to say fear that this rotated performance. It's 76 minutes not allowed to medicines to develop opportunity. Local biz and 80% minutes to set a timpani to our guests. So into straight in America to post anytime to along in the universal. Even though to be a many cliff situation with a national build when they take themselves about lived in this video in still worse stability. Little look at 79 minutes to post a district in America. Every single minute's predictions when they want list to profess works. Also sometimes as national and then make it name a little building. In terms of addition of the party, were set released to menacingly % of a provided too much compens and doing those into America. In more catting, a real 2 instance in more protection of addition of these new report that work. Now quick along that people who different 6 with many cliffs. If notice not away, it sits as a good protectional man. Sometimes it know that too much lust the menacings in a mare. Every edition has not been living and not prevailed anything that ensaluted with men. If it no good protection of it too much men, in a mare could not in push this ending to no forget no said. Another is a great force no to a mare when some people recognize they knew men as addition. It made the new pressure body but choose no saving men forward and much proved they do. Into much that no to a man was rolling more pressure, no preventer of the addition man. Sometimes at that scene prevents men were no many pressure in something said. In new medicines to medicine forget. In no protection of blogs ends when they find that people in previously prefix pressed and they knew to scrub them. Even though from many farms that we have building this by the individual before the proof of cliffs, to do for the 16 years, to do well as company with men, even though too much men stone because the none of 200 piece and the every air of the judge at Mara. Tell me this new said, the 76 minutes lest of great people continues when no previously well competed or their men, when they simply sin any people were no completed. From this 80% will to see the difference legend of their appearment to come to a new minutes of said. A very month of gods of noble part of said, or more prefix back and on myself may then made new minutes as a build. Eventually at a name let that men, and speaking more tepnicids. Even no menacing per se will find that recently meant to them and mensural fare at remead. Or many people face receivedness, in the additions who should now, continues of this no to a mere %. When they'll come at least to this building this, is no previous in the biggest as addition. We do have transas because as 1 point men for the news in, which is no matter to the program for the particular protection in this paramen. Even though find your life, just as his break said, it's building to America that no fares to this is really. Timbek to build it in the one of this challenges build, and 20 people have ever seen by this places, it has only presents unmatched remat in program cell, or new percent season says, and from this end of the term. Aware their fares work with men is not assisted in program, if no mess remember that may be sin as addition. Even no proven place remember is not when they proceed in the farm dividends, or money people as energy to be saying it not when to do. 889 will not met it as filled then where there. Even though both 32,000 minutes that in promote people who stayed any notice that men tend to care. Even no proven place we seen that the number of quick and these a program as another doing. Our medi construct these new infamy we call the 80% predicted men. If no proven place, we prepare to the number quick. Our medi construct these new infamy to force that menacins of tib. Whenever to do still that they seen eight-piece professor. Eight-piece professor provid men's improved that were everywhere because the new. In this is even. We do have no nunder about that 74th is information for construct another menacins information for God. In the 2.1, we be given por very private to penning with it. The sunted that does information to be ever took necked the anywhere. We did not either. And they feel that in promote people who get forward. Even no proven place we just, the too much menses for many people called too long to resolute proved men. Implicit least the too much mensens is no Democrat within the cur and self is good. In that build informate, in toe people have success on new professor. In so form is process to it. Even no when was no menacins was no previous in the paramen. Even no quickly hard, if you get find that menacin with men, is no previous men for gone, and forcefully to do his home. Even no clip men that living in a good in new men will privet, enforcefully to know well menace when a privet men that, when to do the six men's on the best, and no dis once in set. Even no clipman is completely met. In 2002, a date at least passed to this fact, and constructed the in promote with the 2004. In many people were find that menace in menness. Everything in met menace improved that in promote. Every singsome said, we cut it mad that men is many censor that men. We know become to separately, to place this men to be ready to do. Confirm that justice run the to a build, begins of force well. Even no menace that was no menace into the men, in processionate still with men. Even no build that has able, because this is developed. Even no proven place we keep my workplace people farm and an informed about for to be DP effect when they sit resaluted. Not Emma heard about it by end of day. Park told her himself quietly after the afternoon rotation, standing in the corridor outside the trauma bay with his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone who was still not entirely sure they'd done the right thing, but had decided to commit to it anyway. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. What did he say, Rourke, after you left? I don't know. I didn't stay to hear it. Probably smart. She started walking toward the nursing station. Park, ma'am, what you did in there, don't expect it to fix anything. Not immediately. People like Rourke don't change because they get challenged once. They change because the people around them stop agreeing, and that takes time. I know. But it matters anyway. She rounded the corner. Come to the trauma bay at 0600 tomorrow. I want to show you something about airway management that will make your assessment scores look very, very different. Park stood in the corridor after she left, and he was smiling. A small, private smile that he didn't bother to hide, because there was nobody left in the corridor to see it. 4 corridors away, Danny Rourke was sitting in his quarters staring at the wall, running Park's words through his head for the 4th time, feeling something he wasn't used to feeling and didn't have the vocabulary to name cleanly. He was going to need to do something about this. He just hadn't figured out what yet. And what he eventually decided to do, the specific, calculated thing he decided to do in the privacy of his own anger, was going to set in motion the exact sequence of events that ended with Captain Michael Hayes standing in the center of a mess hall, in full view of everyone who had ever laughed, and doing the last thing any of them expected. But that was still days away. For now, Emma Fields went back to her quarters, soaked her leg for 20 minutes, did her exercises, and lay in the quiet dark with her eyes open, listening to the particular sound of a bass settling into night. In 22 days, there would be an assessment. In 17 days, something would happen in the mess hall that nobody would see coming. In 16 days, Danny Rourke would make the worst miscalculation of his career. But tonight, Emma breathed in, breathed out, pressed her palm flat against her thigh the way she always did, and told herself what she had been telling herself since Kandahar. Still here, still moving, still standing. That had always been enough. She chose again tonight to believe that it still was. 16 days before the assessment, Danny Rourke made his move. He didn't do it publicly. That was the part Emma hadn't anticipated. Not because she thought he was above it, but because everything he'd done until now had been performance, had been for an audience, had been the kind of cruelty that needed witnesses to feel real. She'd prepared herself for the public version. She had not prepared herself for the private one. It came in the form of a formal concern, submitted through the base's internal medical review channel, signed by Danny Rourke and countersigned by two others she hadn't expected, Carver and a third medic named Briggs, who Emma had never once had a direct conflict with, and whose name on that document landed like cold water thrown in a face. She found out about it at 0700 on a Wednesday, when Patterson called her into her office and closed the door, which Patterson only did when the conversation was going to require it. "Sit down," Patterson said. Emma sat. Patterson slid the document across the desk without preamble. Emma read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set it on the desk and looked at the wall just past Patterson's shoulder, because looking at Patterson directly right now would have required a level of composure she was rapidly running out of. The document stated, in careful and bureaucratically neutral language, that 3 members of the medical unit had observed Sergeant Emma Fields performing clinical duties in a manner that raised concerns about patient safety and operational effectiveness, specifically citing her physical limitations as a risk factor in high-pressure situations. It requested a formal review of her current assignment and a determination of whether her injuries constituted a limitation that required duty reclassification. Duty reclassification, desk work, administrative roles, the kind of careful, padded reassignment that the Army handed to people it didn't know what else to do with. "Is this legitimate?" Emma asked. Her voice came out flat and precise, which was what happened when she was controlling something very large with a very small container. "It went through proper channels," Patterson said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Patterson was quiet for a moment. "The concerns cited are generalized. There are no specific incidents documented, no patient names, no dates, no clinical outcomes referenced. It's an opinion dressed in procedural language. But it triggers a review. It triggers a review." Patterson folded her hands on the desk, "which will be conducted by Dr. Harmon in a panel that includes 2 outside evaluators from the Regional Medical Command. They'll assess your clinical performance over the last 60 days. Emma thought about the last 60 days. She thought about the trauma bay on that Friday. She thought about 4 patients in a code call, and her voice cutting through the noise, and her hands knowing where to go. She thought about every simulation, every rotation, every 6-hour stretch on her feet when her leg was reporting a 7-point pain level, and she was doing the job anyway. "When?" she asked. 2 weeks, concurrent with the physical assessment." Emma picked up the document. She read the 3 names at the bottom one more time. Then she set it back on Patterson's desk. "Okay. Emma, this is a serious—" "I know what it is." She stood. "I'm going to need my last 60 days of patient outcome data pulled and formatted. Can your office do that, or should I do it myself?" Patterson stared at her. "I'll have it to you by end of day." "Thank you." Emma moved toward the door. "Emma," Patterson's voice was different this time, quieter, the professional surface slightly worn through to something underneath. "I want you to know that when I say this is serious, I'm not saying it because I doubt you. I'm saying it because someone went after your career with paperwork, and paperwork is harder to fight than words in a break room." Emma stopped with her hand on the door. She didn't turn around. I know the difference between a fight I can win and one I can't, she said. This one I can win. She opened the door and walked out. She went directly to Hayes. This was not something she had planned to do. She had planned to go to the supply corridor and stand quietly for a few minutes and let the heat of what she was feeling burn down to something manageable. That had been the plan. But her feet took her to the corridor outside Hayes' office instead, and she stood in front of his door for 2 full seconds before she knocked. "Come in." She opened the door. He was at the desk reading, and he looked up with the particular focused attention of someone who gave whatever was in front of them their complete presence. She closed the door behind her. "Rourke filed a formal concern through the medical review channel," she said, "requesting a duty reclassification review. It's been countersigned by Carver and Briggs. It goes to panel in 2 weeks." Hayes put down what he was reading. "When did this come through?" "This morning. Patterson just told me." He was silent for a moment, not the silence of someone thinking about what to say, but the silence of someone who already knew what they thought and was deciding how to say it. "Sit down, Sergeant." "I'd rather stand, sir." A beat. "All right." He leaned back slightly. "Talk me through what you need." She blinked. She had not expected that to be the first thing out of his mouth. She had expected, she wasn't sure. Not that, anyway. "I need my patient outcome data from the last 60 days, she said. "I need it formatted in a way that a review panel can read clearly. I need to know the specific criteria they'll use for the clinical evaluation portion, and I need time, outside of my regular rotation, to prepare a formal response to the concern document." Hayes nodded slowly as she spoke, the way someone nodded when they were keeping a list. "What else?" She hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a half second, but he caught it. She could see that he caught it, because his eyes sharpened slightly in the way of someone who noticed everything and filed it. "I need to know if you think the panel is going to be objective," she said. The room was very quiet. "Tell me why you're asking that," he said. "Because I know how these panels work. I've seen them work. And I know that a concern document with 3 signatures reads differently than a concern document with 1. I know that the language used, patient safety, operational effectiveness, is language that panel members respond to. I know that the person conducting the review is Dr. Harmon, who has always been professionally correct with me, but who I have never been able to read clearly." She kept her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to intervene. I'm asking you to tell me honestly whether I'm walking into a process that is designed to arrive at a predetermined outcome." Hayes held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "I don't believe the panel is compromised. Harmon is methodical, and he's fair. The 2 outside evaluators are from regional command, and they have no stake in what happens here." He paused. "What I do believe is that the concern document is thin, and that a 60-day patient outcome record like yours will dismantle it in about 12 minutes. Something loosened slightly in Emma's chest, just slightly. "You've looked at my outcomes." "I looked at your file the week I arrived," he said. "It was thorough reading." She almost asked what that meant. She stopped herself. "I'll have my office pull the outcome data today," Hayes said. "You'll have it formatted and ready by tomorrow morning. And I want you to keep training. Don't change anything. Don't slow down. Don't pull back. Don't give anyone a reason to point at the preparation phase and call it evidence of something." Emma nodded. "Understood, sir." "And Sergeant," he waited until she met his eyes. "What Rourke did, submitting that document, he's going to find out very quickly that it backfired. Because now it's official. Now there's a record. And the record is going to show exactly what you've been doing for the last 60 days. She looked at him for a moment. This man she had known for less than 2 weeks. This man who had arrived at a base she'd been miserable in and had quietly, methodically, without any announcement, started removing the walls she'd been boxed into one by one. "Why are you doing all of this?" she asked. He looked faintly surprised by the question. "Because it's right," he said, as if it were simple, as if it had always been exactly that simple. Emma nodded once. "Thank you, sir." She left his office and stood in the corridor and breathed. Park found out about the formal complaint by lunch. Lisa Tran found out by 1300. By 1400, it had moved through the unit's informal channels, the way everything moved through them. Fast and slightly distorted, the way information was always slightly distorted by the time it reached the people who were most affected by it. What none of them knew was what Briggs was doing at 1430, which was sitting in a bathroom stall in the East Corridor with his phone in his hands and his stomach in a knot, staring at a text he was trying and failing to write. Briggs was 26 years old. He'd signed the document because Danny had asked him to, and because in the moment, with Danny looking at him with that particular steady expectation of his, saying no had felt impossible in the way that things sometimes felt impossible when you were in the habit of going along with a person and had been in that habit for long enough that you'd forgotten how to stop. He'd regretted it within 4 hours. He'd regretted it in the specific, physical way that you regretted things that couldn't be taken back. A tight, persistent discomfort in the chest that didn't respond to logic or reassurance. He put his phone away without sending the text. Then he took it out again. Then he put it away. He sat in the bathroom stall for 11 minutes, which was long enough for him to think through every possible version of what came next. The version where he said nothing. The version where he went to Patterson. The version where he went directly to Emma Fields, whom he had never spoken to directly, not once, not a single real conversation in the 7 months he'd been on base. He thought about Danny's voice in the break room, the impressions, the laughter, the way Carver had looked at her sandwich while Park told Danny to do the math. Briggs put his phone away for the last time, stood up, and walked out of the bathroom. He went to the nursing station and asked the medic at the desk where Sergeant Fields was. 11 minutes, major twist. Several Fields stood up the supply corridor. Of course she was. It seemed to Emma, in retrospect, that every significant conversation of the last 2 weeks had happened in the supply corridor, as if the universe had designated it as the place where things that needed to be said finally got said. Briggs appeared in the doorway and she looked up, and she saw immediately from his face that this was not a casual visit. "Sergeant Fields," he said, "I need to—" He stopped, tried again. "I signed the document." Emma looked at him steadily. "I know, I shouldn't have," he said it quickly, like something that had been under pressure and finally found the release. "I want you to know that I know that. I signed it because Rourke asked me to, and I've been going along with Danny Rourke for 7 months because it's easier than not going along with him. And He stopped again. His jaw tightened. "That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse." Emma set down her clipboard. She gave him her full attention, which was not a small thing. When Emma Fields gave you her full attention, you felt the weight of it. "Did you witness anything specific?" she asked. "Any incident, any patient interaction, any clinical moment that genuinely concerned you?" "No," he said, immediately and without hesitation. "Not once, not ever." "Then here's what's going to happen," Emma said. "The panel convenes in 2 weeks. You're going to be asked to substantiate the concerns you signed your name to. When they ask you, you're going to tell them exactly what you just told me, that you have no specific incidents to report, and that your signature was not based on direct clinical observation." Briggs stared at her. "You want me to testify against my own document?" "I want you to tell the truth," Emma said. "That's all. I don't need you to do anything dramatic. I don't need you to fall on a sword. I just need you to say what's actually true when someone officially asks you." He was quiet for a moment, processing. Rourke is going to be dealing with his own situation." She picked her clipboard back up. "But that's not your concern right now. Your concern right now is whether you're the kind of medic who tells the truth when it matters. Only you know the answer to that." She turned back to her inventory. Briggs stood in the doorway for a moment longer. "Sergeant Fields." Briggs, for what it's worth, I've watched you work, in the trauma bay, in the corridors. I've been watching for 7 months, and I've never once seen you be anything other than good. You're really good at what you do. The clipboard didn't move. Her face didn't change. But something behind her eyes shifted in the way that things shifted when words arrived that you had been needing to hear for a very long time and had given up expecting. "Thank you," she said, quietly, simply. He left. She stood in the supply corridor, alone, and breathed. The training sessions with Dr. Reyes had been running for 12 days by that point, and something was happening that Emma hadn't entirely allowed herself to believe would happen. She was getting faster. Not dramatically, not in the cinematic way where everything clicks into place overnight and the music swells and the numbers flip. It was slower and more honest than that. It was 2 minutes shaved off her time by the end of week 1, then another 40 seconds by day 9, then a full minute and a half when Dr. Reyes corrected the specific way she planted her left foot during the load transition point at the half-mile mark. 12 days in, she ran the 2 miles in 34 minutes and 12 seconds. She was standing at the track's edge, pack still on her back, catching her breath, when Hayes jogged up from the far end of the track. He'd been watching, not hovering, just present in the way he was present for things he considered important. 34:12, she said before he could ask. "I clocked it at 34:10, he said. Reyes was right about the foot plant. 2 seconds, I'll take it. You've got 12 days left." "I know." She pulled the pack straps loose with practiced efficiency. "I need 2 more minutes." "You'll get them." She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching you train for 12 days, he said. "And in 12 days, I haven't seen you have a bad session. Not one. You show up, you work, you adjust when Reyes tells you to adjust. You don't fight the process." He paused. "Most people fight the process." "Fighting the process is a waste of energy," she said. "I know. That's what I said." He said it so simply, so plainly, that she realized he wasn't complimenting her. He was recognizing her. There was a difference, and she felt it clearly. She started walking toward the exit. He fell into step beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. "The panel prep is going," she said. "The outcome data is strong." "I know, I've seen it." Harmon's office sent the evaluation criteria over this morning. The clinical section plays directly to trauma performance. There are 3 scenario simulations. "Good. The physical component is the variable." She said it plainly because she had made a decision somewhere in the last 12 days to stop treating her own reality as something to be managed and apologized for. 32 minutes is the standard, and I'm at 34:10, and I have 12 days. You'll make it. You keep saying that because I keep meaning it. She was quiet for a moment, walking. Her left leg ached the way it always ached after a full training run, and she let it ache, the way she'd learned to let it, without fighting it and without resenting it, because it was part of her body, and her body had kept her alive through things that should have ended her, and that earned it a certain respect. "My mother used to say," Emma said, and then she stopped, because she didn't usually say things that started with, "My mother used to say," to commanding officers she'd known for less than 2 weeks. "What did she say?" Hayes asked. She'd stopped walking. They were standing in the corridor now, and she looked at him and made a decision. The particular decision that people made when they were tired of keeping everything inside the container, and the container was starting to show the strain. She used to say that the people who come for you sideways, with documents, with whispers, with impressions in a break room, those people are always afraid of something. And what they're afraid of is that you're going to keep standing up. Emma looked down the corridor. She was a stubborn woman, my mother. "Sounds like it runs in the family," Hayes said. And this time, Emma didn't stop the smile before it arrived. 2 days before the assessment and the panel review, Danny Rourke did something that nobody had predicted, including Danny Rourke, who had spent the last week watching his carefully constructed social architecture begin to develop cracks that he couldn't explain. Park wasn't laughing at his commentary anymore. Carver had gotten quieter, not hostile, just quieter, in the way of someone recalibrating. Briggs had stopped sitting at his table at lunch, and the two newer transfer medics he'd been cultivating, the ones he'd told about Emma being a feel-good story, had both started showing up, quietly and without announcement, to Emma's voluntary simulation sessions on Wednesday mornings. He was losing the room, and he could feel it, the way you felt the temperature drop before a storm. Not dramatic, just a steady, undeniable shift in the air. So he went to Emma's door, not her office, her quarters. At 1900 hours on the Thursday before the assessment, he knocked on the door of Sergeant Emma Fields' quarters and stood in the corridor and waited. She opened the door. She was in off-duty clothes, her hair down, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting something, but not quite this, not this specific version of what was coming. "Rourke," she said. "I need a minute," he said. She studied him, then she stepped aside. He came in. Her quarters were small and clean, and the photograph was on the shelf near the window, the unit in Afghanistan, and his eyes went to it for just a second before he pulled them back to her. She did not offer him a seat. She stood. "I want to withdraw the document," he said. The silence that followed was the fullest silence Emma had experienced in recent memory. "You want to withdraw the formal concern?" she said, to make sure she had heard correctly. "Yes, the one you submitted through the medical review channel, the one with 3 signatures." "Yes." Emma leaned against the wall behind her. She crossed her arms. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, completely, without flinching. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. She could see him trying on different versions of the answer. The strategic one, the apologetic one, the self-serving one, and discarding all of them, one by one, until what was left was something smaller and less protected. "Because it wasn't true," he said finally. "None of it was documented for a reason. There wasn't anything to document. I've never seen you endanger a patient, not once." He stopped. "I've seen you save them. I've seen you run that trauma bay, and I've seen what you can do, and He stopped again. Something in his jaw tightened. "I don't have a good reason. That's the honest answer. I don't have a good reason for any of it." Emma was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was not warm, and it was not cold. It was the voice she used for information that needed to be delivered accurately and without distortion. "You can withdraw the document. That is your right, and I won't oppose it, but I want you to understand something." She held his gaze. "Withdrawing it doesn't undo what the last 2 months have been. It doesn't give back the 9 days before Hayes arrived, when I walked these corridors and listened to you perform for your audience. It doesn't return the morning I stood against that wall and heard myself described as a liability." He didn't look away. She gave him credit for that. "I know," he said. "So why are you here?" she asked again. "Actually, not the reason that sounds good. The actual reason." A long pause, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because Park stood up in the break room and said things I couldn't argue with," he said. "And because I've been lying awake thinking about what my record is going to look like in 5 years, and whether I'm going to be the guy who did this." He exhaled. "I don't want to be the guy who did this." Emma looked at him for one more long moment. "Then don't be," she said simply. "Withdraw the document. Do your job. Let the panel proceed on the merits because, on the merits, it ends exactly one way." She pushed off the wall. "And the next time someone comes to you with an impression of a person who saved 4 lives in Kandahar and asks you to laugh, I trust you know what to do." He left. Emma closed the door. She stood with her back to it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she walked to the shelf and looked at the photograph. 12 people in the dust, squinting against the sun, all of them upright, all of them whole. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh. Still here, still standing, 2 days. The formal concern document was officially withdrawn at 0800 the following morning, citing insufficient clinical documentation to substantiate the concerns raised. The withdrawal required Carver's and Briggs's counter-signatures, as well as Danny's, and all three were affixed by 0900. Patterson informed Emma at 0915. Emma was at the nurse's station. She said, "Thank you," and went back to work. But the panel review did not dissolve with the document. Dr. Harmon's office confirmed it would proceed as scheduled. The review had been formally initiated, and a formal initiation required a formal conclusion, regardless of whether the original complaint was withdrawn, which meant Emma still had to walk in front of a three-person panel with her patient data, her clinical record, and the physical assessment results, and make the case for herself with evidence rather than words. She had 1 day to prepare. She spent it working. Not on the documents. Those were ready, had been ready for 4 days, organized and cross-referenced and formatted in the way that review panels actually read information. Not in the way that people preparing for review panels sometimes formatted things to make themselves look thorough. She spent the day working her rotation, running her rounds, teaching Park the secondary assessment protocol she'd promised, answering trans questions about field triage priority sequencing with the patience she brought to everything. She worked her day completely and fully, and without looking at the clock more than was necessary. At 1700, she went to the track. Alone this time, no Reyes, no Hayes. Just Emma and the empty track and the pack on her back and the specific conversation she had, privately and without apology, with the left side of her body every time she ran. "You have done harder things than this. You have done harder things than this, and you are still here. Do not stop." She ran. The air was cool. Her breath came in measured rhythms. Her left leg ached with the familiar, almost companionable ache that had become as much a part of her landscape as the sound of her own heartbeat. She crossed the 2-mile mark. She looked at her watch. 31 minutes and 58 seconds. She stood at the finish line of the empty track and looked at that number for a very long time. Then she sat down on the ground, just sat down, right there on the track, pack still on her back, and she pressed both palms flat against the ground and felt the cold solidity of it, and she breathed. 31:58, 2 seconds under the requirement. She had done it. She was still sitting there, very still, very quiet, when she heard footsteps and looked up and saw Hayes coming toward her from the far end of the track, holding 2 cups of coffee, as if he had somehow known, as if he had always known, that this was the moment she was going to need someone to walk toward her rather than away. He sat down beside her on the track, cross-legged, in his uniform, on the ground, without any self-consciousness at all. He handed her one of the cups. "What did you run?" he asked. 31:58, she said. He nodded. Not the enthusiastic nod of someone performing celebration. The slow, solid nod of someone receiving information they had been waiting for and were satisfied by. They sat on the track in the cooling air and drank their coffee without speaking, and the silence between them was the easiest silence Emma had sat inside in longer than she could cleanly remember. Tomorrow, the panel. Tomorrow, the assessment. Tomorrow, everything that had been building since the first morning she had walked these corridors and felt the room shift around her uneven footsteps. Tonight, there was the track and the coffee and the number 31:58 and the quiet, steady presence of a person who had decided, for reasons he'd called simply right, to show up. Emma Fields looked at the photograph she carried in her memory. 12 people in the dust, all of them upright. She added one more face to the image. Tomorrow, the morning of the assessment, arrived the way important mornings always arrived. Without ceremony, without warning, just the alarm at 4:45 and the cold floor, and Emma's palm pressed flat against her thigh in the dark. She lay still for exactly 1 minute, not because she was afraid, because she had learned, somewhere between Kandahar and this specific morning, that the 60 seconds before a significant thing happened were worth inhabiting fully. You didn't get them back. Once the door opened, it opened. And everything after that was motion. She got up, she dressed, she drank her coffee standing at the counter, looking at nothing in particular, letting the silence of 0500 settle around her like something solid. Then she picked up her pack and walked out the door. The physical assessment was scheduled for 0700 at the PT track. The panel review was at 1300 in conference room B. Emma had 8 hours between the cold morning air of the starting line and the fluorescent quiet of a review panel. 8 hours to get through the first thing before she could think about the second. There were 14 medics running the assessment that morning. Emma was the only one who had spent 22 days specifically preparing for it. She was also, she noted without bitterness, as they assembled at the start line, the only one who had a formal concern document withdrawn from their file in the 48 hours prior. The evaluator was a master sergeant named Kowalski from Regional Command, who had the compact efficiency of someone who had run 1,000 of these and had no investment in any particular outcome. He briefed them in 60 seconds flat, 2 miles, full load. Timer starts when he says go. Questions? No questions. Emma stood at the line and adjusted her pack straps and did not look at the other medics. She did not look at the small cluster of people at the track's edge. Patterson, Tran, Park, who had shown up before 0700 on a morning they didn't have to be here, because that was the kind of people they had quietly revealed themselves to be. She did not look for Hayes, though she knew, with the particular awareness she developed over the last 3 weeks, that he was there somewhere. She looked straight ahead. Kowalski said go. She moved. To first mile was about control. That was what Dr. Reyes had told her, over and over, in the specific patient way of someone who understood that the body under stress defaulted to old habits, and that new habits required conscious maintenance. Don't overcompensate on the left. Plant the foot fully. Let the mechanics carry you. Don't fight the pack. Let it sit. Breathe in 4 counts, out 4 counts. Control. Emma ran in control. Her leg reported its presence at the quarter-mile mark, the way it always did. Not pain exactly, not at this stage, just information. She received it the way she received all information, acknowledged, categorized, filed. Not a problem, not yet, just data. She passed the half-mile mark without looking at her watch. Around her, the other medics were finding their rhythms, some going out too fast, which she recognized immediately and which Reyes had warned her about. The ones who went out too fast paid for it at mile 1.5. She kept her pace steady, even, her breathing measured. At the mile marker, she checked her watch. 15 minutes and 40 seconds. She was 8 seconds ahead of where she needed to be. 8 seconds. She did not let herself celebrate it. Celebration was for finish lines, not mile markers. She pressed forward. Second mile was where everything lived. It was where the pack got heavier without actually getting heavier, where the legs stopped sending information and started sending complaints, where the body, depleted and working at threshold, began lobbying hard for the version of reality where stopping was a reasonable option. Emma had had this conversation with her body before. She had had it on a dirt road outside Kandahar while crawling on her hands and knees under fire. Compared to that, this was a track in California, in cool morning air with people watching who wanted her to succeed. She did not stop. At the 1.5 mile mark, she felt it. The specific burning that Dr. Reyes had told her would come, the point where the corrected gait mechanics were working hardest against 14 months of deeply ingrained compensation patterns. It felt like someone had wrapped a hot wire around the outer edge of her left knee. She adjusted her foot plant fractionally, the way Reyes had shown her, and kept moving. She could hear her own breathing now, loud and purposeful in her ears. She could hear the pack shifting slightly with each stride. She could not hear anything from the edges of the track, which meant she had gone somewhere internal. the place she went when something mattered enough that the external world fell away, and there was only the task and her body and the ground. She came around the final curve. She saw the finish line. She did not look at her watch. She ran. And she crossed the line, and Kowalski clicked the timer and said, flat and professional and completely without drama, 31:44. Emma stopped, put her hands on her knees, breathed. 31:44. 16 seconds under the requirement. She heard, from the edge of the track, a sound that it took her a moment to identify because she had not been expecting it and because nobody had told them they were allowed to make it. It was applause. Small, immediate, unself-conscious applause from 4 people standing at the edge of a PT track at 07:22 in the morning. She straightened up and looked over. Patterson was clapping with the contained energy of someone for whom outward displays of emotion were rare and therefore significant. Lisa Tran was not trying to contain anything. Park was clapping with one hand against his forearm because he'd been holding a coffee cup in the other and hadn't put it down in time. And Hayes was standing just behind them, not clapping, just standing with his arms at his sides and a look on his face that Emma had not yet seen there and did not have an immediate word for. It was pride. She recognized it a moment later. The particular, specific pride of someone who had watched something they believed in prove itself. She put her pack down and walked over. 31:44, Patterson said. Not a question, just placing the number in the air between them where they could both look at it. 16 seconds to spare, Emma said. Reyes is going to be insufferable about this, Patterson said. Reyes earned it, Emma said. Lisa grabbed her arm. Not a handshake, a grab. The kind you did when words weren't sufficient and physical contact was the only honest option. Emma let it happen. She even, briefly, held on. Park said, "That was something, Sergeant Fields." "It was a run," she said, but she was almost smiling, and he could see it, and they both knew it. She looked at Hayes last. He said, simply and directly, "You ready for this afternoon?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He turned and walked toward the exit, already moving on to whatever came next, the way men like him always moved. Forward, continuously, without lingering in moments longer than the moment required. Emma watched him go for exactly 1 second. Then she picked up her pack and followed. The conference room at 1300 was smaller than it looked in her preparation. That was always true of rooms that you had built up in your head. They contracted in reality, became more ordinary, stripped of the significance you'd been loading onto them for weeks. Dr. Harmon sat at the center of the table, flanked by the 2 evaluators from Regional Command, a colonel named Whitfield on his left and a major named Chen on his right. Chen had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Whitfield had been taking notes before Emma even sat down, which she read as either very good or very neutral, and decided to treat as neutral until she had more information. Emma sat across from them with her files and her data and 14 years of doing her job correctly, and she waited. Harmon opened. "Sergeant Fields, thank you for your time this afternoon. As you know, the formal concern document that initiated this review was withdrawn 48 hours ago. However, regulations require the review to proceed to completion once formally initiated. We want to be clear that this panel has no predetermined conclusion and that the withdrawal of the original complaint is factored into our approach." "I understand," Emma said. Whitfield looked up from his notes. "I've had a chance to review your patient outcome data from the last 60 days. Before we proceed to the scenario assessments, I want to ask you directly, is there anything in that record you want to contextualize or explain?" Emma looked at him. "No, sir." A pause. "Nothing at all?" "The record is the record," she said. 94 patients in 60 days. Clinical outcomes tracked and documented. I'm comfortable with every decision reflected in those files." Whitfield made a note. Emma couldn't read what it said. Chen spoke for the first time. Her voice was precise and without warmth. Not hostile, simply professional in the cleanest sense of the word. Sergeant Fields, the complaint as filed cited concerns about physical limitations creating operational risk. The complaint has been withdrawn and no specific incidents were documented. However, I want to give you the opportunity to address the underlying question directly, since it's the kind of thing that, if unaddressed, tends to resurface. The room was very quiet. "Go ahead," Emma said. "Do your injuries limit your clinical effectiveness?" Emma had been waiting for that question for 3 weeks. She had prepared 17 different versions of the answer. In the moment, sitting in that conference room with the afternoon light coming through the window and the weight of 2 months behind her, she chose none of them. "No," she said, "they changed how I move. They didn't change what I know, what I can assess, what decisions I make under pressure, or what my hands do when a patient needs them. I am slower on a PT track than I was 4 years ago. I am not slower in a trauma bay." I would challenge anyone in this building to find a clinical record that contradicts that. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that rooms produced when something true had been said plainly. Whitfield looked at Chen. Chen looked at Whitfield. Harmon looked at the table. "Let's move to the scenario assessments," Whitfield said. 17 minutes to the anythings again. There were 3 scenarios. The panel ran them consecutively, without breaks, each one slightly more complex than the last. The first was a standard multi-casualty intake with triage prioritization. Emma moved through it the way she moved through everything, her hands and her voice operating with the synchronized efficiency of 14 years. The second introduced a simulated equipment failure mid-assessment and required real-time improvisation. She improvised. The third, the one she had been most concerned about, the one that required sustained physical response over 12 simulated minutes, she ran with her left leg doing exactly what it had been doing for 14 months, and the outcomes she produced were textbook. When it was over, Harmon looked at his evaluator notes and then looked at Emma with an expression she had never quite seen on his face before. Something that resembled, if she was reading it correctly, a man recalibrating an assumption he hadn't fully known he was carrying. "We'll deliver findings within 48 hours, Whitfield said. "Thank you, Sergeant." Emma stood. She gathered her files. She nodded at the panel. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. "Dr. Harmon," she said. He looked up. "I've been in your trauma bay for 14 months, she said. "I would appreciate, going forward, that the quality of my work speak for itself rather than requiring a panel to confirm it." She said it without anger, without accusation, the same voice she used for clinical information. That's all. She left before he could respond. What happened in the mess hall that evening was not planned by anyone in any formal sense. It was not coordinated. There was no signal, no arrangement, no script. It happened because human beings, gathered in the same room, sometimes arrive at the same moment simultaneously. And sometimes that moment is the one that changes everything. Emma came to dinner late, 18:30, later than usual, because she had gone back to her quarters after the panel and sat quietly for 30 minutes, doing nothing at all, which was something she almost never did and which she recognized she had needed. She came into the mess hall with her tray and her coffee and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been running at full capacity for 3 weeks and had finally crossed the line. The room was full, standard dinner crowd, medics, support staff, a handful of officers at the far table. Danny Rourke was there. He was at his usual table, but something was different. The table was less full than usual. Carver was there. Briggs was not. Emma moved through the line without looking at him. She collected her food. She turned toward the corner table where she normally sat, the one near the window. She was halfway across the room when she heard the chair. It was Hayes, rising to his feet at the officer's table. He didn't say anything. He didn't raise his voice or gesture to the room. He simply stood up, turned toward Emma, and came to attention. The precise, formal, military attention of a man with 22 years of service. and he saluted her. Clean, sharp, held. The mess hall noticed. These things moved in rooms the way weather moved. The nearest people first, then outward in a ripple. The first table close to Hayes went quiet, then the next, then the one after that. The noise of dinner conversation fell away in stages until the room was producing a silence that had its own texture, its own weight. Emma stopped walking. She stood in the center of the mess hall with her tray in her hands and looked at Captain Michael Hayes standing at attention, his salute held with the formality of someone who understood exactly what a salute meant and was using it with full intention. He spoke into the silence, not loudly. He didn't need to be loud. This woman ran a trauma bay with 4 critical patients and saved every single one of them. She crawled 30 meters under enemy fire in Kandahar with a medical kit when her own unit was pinned down, and she kept 2 men breathing until they could be evacuated. He held her gaze across the room. She ran 2 miles at full load this morning with a leg repaired in 3 places, and she finished 16 seconds under standard. She has served this country with more integrity than most of us will ever be asked to demonstrate. His voice was steady and clear and left no room for irony or interpretation. Sergeant Fields is not a liability. She is exactly what this branch of service is supposed to produce, and she has earned every measure of respect in this room. Nobody moved. The silence was absolute. Emma stood in the center of it with her tray in her hands and the weight of 2 months pressing against the back of her throat, and she did what she always did. She breathed. She absorbed it. She let it be what it was without trying to make it smaller. Then she set her tray down on the nearest table, and she came to attention, and she returned the salute. Clean, steady, held. What happened next was not a movie moment. It did not sweep through the room in one perfect simultaneous wave. It was messier than that and more real. It started with Park. He was on his feet before he had consciously decided to stand, his chair scraping back, his posture straightening into something that had not been there 2 months ago. He did not salute. He was not senior enough to make that gesture land with weight, but he stood, and the standing was the point. Tran was already standing. She had been standing since Hayes got to the word Kandahar. Patterson stood from the far end of the room, slowly and deliberately, the way she did everything, with complete awareness of the significance of her own actions. Then others, not all of them, not instantly. Some of the younger medics looked at each other first, doing the social calculation that people did in rooms where the current was shifting and they were trying to figure out which way to swim. But enough of them stood that the ones who remained seated became visible in a different way, conspicuous in their stillness. Danny Rourke was seated. He sat with his jaw tight and his eyes on the table in front of him, and he did not look at Emma, and he did not stand. And Emma, watching from across the room, did not need him to. She had not needed him to for a long time, she realized. Whatever she had needed from Danny Rourke, she had already gotten it, in a small room, in a quiet conversation, when he had looked at the photograph on her shelf and said that he didn't want to be the guy who did this. Whether he had meant it was a question only time would answer. But the room was standing. Emma looked at Hayes, who had lowered his salute and was watching the room with the quiet, patient expression of a man who had done the thing he set out to do and was simply allowing it to settle. Their eyes met. She nodded once. He nodded back. And something passed between them in that single exchange. Something that did not have a military rank or a job title or a formal name. Something that lived in the category of human things that mattered more than any of those categories and always had. Emma picked up her tray. She walked to her corner table near the window. She sat down and she ate her dinner, and the mess hall slowly returned to its noise around her. Different noise than before, recalibrated, carrying something in it that the earlier noise had not. She did not look at Danny Rourke's table again. She looked out the window instead, at the dark California evening, and she thought about her mother's voice, worn smooth with use the way important things got worn smooth. The people who come for you sideways are always afraid of something. What they're afraid of is that you're going to keep standing up. She was standing up. She had been standing up since the cold floor of 0445 every single morning, since the field hospital in Germany, since the dirt road outside Kandahar, where she had made the decision, the specific, private, unwitnessed decision that no metal could fully capture, that she was not going to let the ground be the last thing she felt beneath her. The mess hall noise continued around her. Her coffee cooled. Her leg ached with its familiar presence. She was still here. She was still moving. And tomorrow, and the day after that, she was going to walk these corridors exactly the way she had always walked them, unevenly, purposefully, and without apology. The rest of them were going to have to decide what they did with that. The panel findings arrived in 41 hours, not 48. Emma was in the middle of a Wednesday morning simulation drill when Patterson appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay and caught her eye with a specific look that meant something had happened, and it needed to happen now. Emma handed the drill off to Park without breaking stride and followed Patterson into the corridor. Patterson handed her the document without preamble. Emma read it standing. The language was formal and clean, and entirely without ambiguity. The review panel found no clinical evidence to support the concerns raised in the original complaint. Sergeant Emma Fields's patient outcomes over the 60-day review period reflected performance consistent with the highest standards of trauma medicine practice at this installation. The panel further noted that the physical assessment results demonstrated full compliance with field readiness requirements for her assigned role. No duty reclassification was warranted. No further review was recommended. Case closed. She read it twice. Then she folded it in half and held it at her side. "Well," Patterson said. "Well," Emma agreed. "Harmon signed it himself. He didn't have to do that. The outside evaluators have full authority. He chose to add his signature." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing that. Harmon, who she had never been able to read, Harmon, who she had told, with her hand on his conference room door, that she expected her work to speak for itself. He had heard her, in the specific, quiet way that certain people heard things, not immediately, not loudly, but completely. "Okay," Emma said. "That's all you've got? Okay? What would you like me to say, Patterson?" Patterson looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something she had done exactly once before in the 14 months Emma had known her. She reached out and put her hand briefly on Emma's arm. 1 second, maybe 2. Then she pulled it back and straightened her jacket and returned to being the woman who ran a trauma unit like a ship captain ran a deck. "I'd like you to go back in there and finish your drill," she said. Emma almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She went back in and finished the drill. What nobody had anticipated, not Emma, not Hayes, not anyone who had been watching the social architecture of the base rebuild itself in the 2 days since the mess hall, was what Danny Rourke did that Thursday morning. He asked to speak with Emma. Not Patterson, not Hayes, not the administrative channel or the formal process, or any of the structures that people use when they wanted to say something important, while also keeping it at a professional distance. He sent a message directly to Emma's work terminal at 0800. 4 lines, no subject heading. "I know you don't owe me anything. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to talk if you're willing. I'll be in the East Corridor break room at 1000. I'll understand if you don't come." Emma read it 3 times. Then she forwarded it to no one, told no one, and at 0955 walked down the East Corridor and pushed open the break room door. Danny was already there. He was sitting at the table nearest the window with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and he looked like a person who had not slept well in several days, which Emma suspected was accurate. He looked younger than she usually thought of him. Stripped of the performance, the audience, the commentary, he was just a 24-year-old man sitting in a break room waiting to find out if someone he had wronged was going to show up. She had shown up. She sat across from him without taking her coat off, which communicated something, and she was aware it communicated something, and she let it. "I'm listening," she said. He looked at his coffee. "I don't know how to do this right," he said. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this right for 3 days, and I've got nothing. So I'm just going to say it, and you can decide what it's worth." "Go ahead." He looked up at her. "I was wrong. About everything. About the impressions, the break room, the document, all of it. I knew you were good at your job. I knew it before the panel, before Park said anything, before Hayes. I knew it because I have eyes. And I've been in this hospital for 7 months, and you've been here for 14, and there isn't a single day I've come in where you weren't already working." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "And I made you a joke anyway, because you were easy to make a joke about, and because making jokes about people is how I make myself feel like I belong somewhere. And I know that sounds pathetic." Emma said nothing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think forgiveness is something that happens in a break room conversation. I needed you to know that I know what I did, and that I know why the room stood up in the mess hall and I didn't, and that not standing up is something I'm going to be thinking about for a long time." The break room was very quiet. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, the way she looked at patients when she was trying to understand not just the presenting problem, but everything underneath it. What she saw was not someone she was ready to trust, or even particularly like, but it was someone who was, for the first time since she'd known him, completely without his armor. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine," she said, "because it wasn't fine. But I will tell you this." She leaned forward slightly. "You have a choice now that you didn't have a month ago. You've seen what it costs to be the person in that break room. You've seen what it looks like when someone stands up instead. That knowledge is yours. What you do with it is going to tell you more about who you actually are than any of what happened before." He nodded slowly. "That's a generous way to put it." "I'm not being generous," she said. "I'm being accurate." She stood. "Do your job, Rourke. Do it right. That's the only apology that matters to me over the long run." She left him there with his coffee and whatever he was going to do with what she'd said. In the corridor, she stopped for a moment and pressed her palm flat against her thigh and breathed. Still here. Still standing. The statement felt different this morning, less like something she was holding against the dark and more like something she simply knew. The news moved through the base the way all news moved, through Patterson's carefully neutral announcements, through Park's less neutral commentary in the break room, through Tran's complete inability to contain anything she was feeling, which Emma had come to understand was not a flaw, but a feature of Lisa Tran's particular humanity. By end of day Thursday, the panel findings had been absorbed into the base's understanding of itself. The formal concern was gone. The record was clean. Emma's name appeared in the files the way it always had, preceded by her rank, followed by her commendations, framed by 14 years of documented service, and no footnote existed anywhere to suggest it had ever been anything else. But something else was happening, something that did not appear in any official document. The corridors felt different, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. But Emma had been walking these corridors for 14 months, and she knew their texture. She knew which intersections people avoided making eye contact in, which doorways produced the one-beat pause before conversation resumed, which rooms went slightly quieter when she entered them. She knew all of that the way you knew the particular geography of a place that had been unkind to you. That geography was changing. The pause in the doorways was gone. The eye contact held differently, not aggressive, not performative, just normal. The way eye contact worked in places where people saw each other clearly. Medics who had never spoken directly to her started speaking directly to her. Not elaborate speeches, not dramatic reconciliations, just the ordinary human currency of acknowledgement. "Good morning. Nice work in the sim yesterday. How's the leg holding up?" That last one, from a medic named Torres, who she had spoken to exactly twice before, stopped her in the corridor for a half second. "How's the leg holding up?" Not whispered, not edged with discomfort, just asked. The way you asked about something that was part of a person's life, matter-of-factly, with basic human interest. "Better than yesterday," Emma said. "A little worse than tomorrow." Torres laughed. "That's the right answer," he said, and kept walking. Emma stood in the corridor for a moment after he left. Better than yesterday, a little worse than tomorrow. She hadn't planned to say that. It had arrived fully formed, the way things arrived when they were true. She filed it away. It's what nobody had told Emma, what had been in motion for days without her knowledge, arranged in the particular quiet way that Hayes arranged things that mattered to him, was the ceremony. She found out about it on Friday morning, 48 hours after the panel findings, from the most unlikely possible source, Danny Rourke. He appeared at the nurses' station at 08:15 with the expression of someone navigating new terrain carefully and without a map. "Sergeant Fields," she looked up from the patient files. "Rourke, there's a unit assembly tomorrow at 1400, main hall," he paused. "Command requested full attendance. I thought you should know. It's there." He stopped, started over. "Captain Hayes submitted a formal commendation to Regional Command for your service record. The assembly is a recognition ceremony. I found out from Briggs, who found out from the administrative office." Another pause. "I didn't know if anyone had told you." Emma was very still. "No," she said. "No one told me." Rourke nodded. "Okay." He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, it's deserved. The commendation, it's deserved." He walked away before she could respond. Emma sat at the nurse's station and looked at the wall in front of her for a full 60 seconds. A formal commendation, a ceremony, Hayes's name on a document that put her service record in front of Regional Command in a different frame than a panel review. Not defense, not justification, but recognition. Proactive, formal, permanent recognition. She thought about asking him why he hadn't told her. She thought about whether she was supposed to feel differently about it than she did. She thought about her mother's voice and the photograph on the shelf, and 31 minutes and 44 seconds on a PT track in the cool morning air. Then she picked up the patient file she'd been reading and went back to work. Because that was what you did. Because the work was always there, and it was always the truest thing. And she had learned a long time ago that the moments that changed everything were only visible in retrospect. While they were happening, they looked exactly like ordinary days. The main hall at 1400 on Saturday was full in the way that mandatory assemblies were full. Everyone present, most of them not entirely sure what they were there for. The low-level social energy of a group of people waiting to understand the nature of the occasion before deciding how to feel about it. Emma stood near the back. This had not been the plan. The administrative office had sent her a position assignment near the front, which she had noted and then quietly ignored, because standing near the back of a room was something she had been doing for 14 months, and old habits required active effort to break. She stood near the back with her hands at her sides and her posture exactly as it always was, and watched the hall fill. Park found her within 2 minutes, which did not surprise her. He had developed, over the last 3 weeks, a quality of attentiveness that she recognized as the beginning of what would eventually become genuine leadership. He stood beside her without being asked and did not say anything, which was exactly right. Tran materialized on her other side a moment later. She was holding her cover in front of her with both hands, turning it slightly, which was what she did when she was trying not to show how much something was affecting her. "You okay?" Tran asked quietly. "I'm fine," Emma said. "You're near the back." "I'm aware." "You're supposed to be near the front." "I know." Tran looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back at the hall and didn't say anything else, which was an act of remarkable restraint for Lisa Tran, and which Emma appreciated in direct proportion to how rare it was. Colonel Whitfield, the evaluator from the panel, which Emma had not expected, stood at the front of the hall and called the assembly to order. The low-level noise resolved into attention. Whitfield spoke for 3 minutes about unit standards and institutional excellence, and the qualities that distinguish service that met requirements from service that defined them. He spoke in the measured cadences of a man who used language carefully and had chosen every word in front of him with deliberate intent. Then he said, "Captain Michael Hayes will now present a formal commendation." Hayes moved to the front of the hall. He was in his full dress uniform, which Emma had not yet seen him wear, and there was a quality to the room when he stood in front of it that she had observed before. That particular gravity, the way attention organized itself around certain people without effort or performance. He held a document in his hand. He did not look at it. He looked at the back of the room. He looked directly at Emma. "Sergeant Emma Fields," he said, his voice carried to every corner without effort. "Will you please come forward?" The room turned. All of it, every head, every pair of eyes, the full weight of a hall full of people, turned toward the back, toward Emma, and she felt it the way you felt the sun come out from behind a cloud, that sudden total shift in the quality of what was landing on you. She stood still for exactly 2 seconds. Then she moved. Her gait was what it always was, the slight drag of the left leg, the uneven rhythm that had been the subject of impressions in break rooms and laughter in hallways, and that she had carried through 31 minutes and 44 seconds on a PT track, and 4 patients in a trauma bay, and a review panel in every single ordinary day of the last 14 months. She walked through the hall, and the room parted for her, and nobody, not one person, looked at her leg. They looked at her face. They looked at her the way you looked at someone you were finally seeing correctly. She reached the front and stood before Hayes and Colonel Whitfield, and she was aware of Patterson somewhere to her left, standing with her hands clasped and her face composed into something that was not quite professional neutrality and not quite anything else. Hayes looked at her directly, the way he looked at everything, completely without deflection. He read from the document. The formal language of commendation, her service record, her combat deployments, the specific incident in Kandahar that had earned the Bronze Star, her clinical record at this installation, her performance on the field readiness assessment. He read it all, every word, in a hall full of people who had not all known all of it, and as he read, the silence in the room changed in texture, thickened, became something denser and more attentive. When he finished reading, he folded the document. He looked at her. "Sergeant Fields," he said, "in 22 years of service, I have had the privilege of working alongside people who did extraordinary things. What separates the ones I remember from the ones I've forgotten is not the nature of what they did. It's the consistency. It's the decision, made quietly and without an audience, every single day to keep showing up and keep doing the work correctly, regardless of whether anyone around them understood what they were looking at." He reached into his breast pocket and produced the commendation medal, small and formal and entirely real. "This base is better for having you in it," he said, "and I want that on record, officially, permanently." He pinned the medal. Emma stood at attention and felt the slight weight of it settle against her uniform, and she breathed, slow and steady, the way she breathed when things were happening that she needed to be fully present for, rather than processing at a distance. Then Hayes stepped back. He came to full attention. He saluted her, clean, sharp, held. The same salute he had given in the mess hall, but this time in full dress uniform, in front of a formal assembly, with Colonel Whitfield standing beside him, in front of every person on this base who had ever laughed, or looked away, or stood in a hallway and felt the pause before conversation resumed. The silence lasted 1 breath, 2, and then the hall came to attention, not in pieces this time, not in the ripple that had moved through the mess hall with its gaps in its conspicuous seated figures. This time it happened the way things happened when a moment had been building long enough to arrive all at once. The entire hall, standing, the sound of it a single collective motion, and the quality of the silence that followed was the most complete silence Emma had ever stood inside. She returned the salute. Her arm was steady. Her eyes were clear. Her left leg ached with its familiar, honest presence, and she let it ache, because it was part of her, because it had been with her through everything, because the road that had broken it in 4 places had also been the road where she had learned the deepest and most permanent things she would ever know about herself. She did not stop. She never stopped. After the ceremony, the hall dissolved into the ordinary noise of people in motion, and Emma moved through it the way she moved through everything, purposefully, without excessive urgency. Park shook her hand. He held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake. She let him. Tran embraced her, which Emma had known was coming and had already decided not to prevent. She put one arm around Tran's shoulders briefly and then stepped back. Patterson walked past her and said, without stopping or looking at her, 14 months. Took them long enough, which was, from Patterson, the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. Briggs found her near the exit. He was standing slightly apart from the crowd, which was still his natural position, the particular isolation of someone who was figuring out who he wanted to be on the other side of a thing he'd done wrong. He looked at her and said, "Congratulations, Sergeant." Simple, unadorned. She could see in his face that he meant it. "Thank you, Briggs," she said, and kept walking. She did not look for Danny Rourke, but near the hall's main door, she saw him, standing at the edge of the dispersing crowd, not close to anyone in particular, watching the space where she had been standing when Hayes pinned the medal. His face was unreadable, but he was standing differently than he had been 3 weeks ago. Something in his posture had lost the performance quality, the held readiness of someone always prepared to be an audience for themselves. He just looked like a young man who was somewhere in the middle of becoming someone he hadn't decided on yet. He caught her eye across the room. She held his gaze for 1 second, just one, and then she nodded. Not warmly, not coldly, not with any message that could be easily interpreted, just acknowledged, just, "I see you. I'm still here. The rest is yours to figure out." She walked through the door. 26 minutes, 22. Even 9 seconds, 7. It does not repeat the same. The same day and she significantly more better to the mysteria of only brings approaches of. The addition of the door will she matches. The rest is yours to figure out. The rest is yours to figure out. She could trace every message that getting individual to make sense. I'm still here. Stems into 76, 26 minutes. Tim Stam, 26 minutes. Tim Stam, 26 minutes as it back to it none. The rest is yours to figure out. The same day and she significantly more better to the mysteria of only brings approaches him. The rest is yours to figure out. The Tim Stam 26 minutes, 26 minutes. Tim Stam 26 minutes as it back to it none. The rest is yours to figure out. Just I see you. I'm still here. The rest is yours to figure out. The same day and she significantly more better to the mysteria of only brings approaches him. The rest is yours to figure out. Just I see you. I'm still here. The walk through the door in 26 minutes. Tim Stam, Hayes was in the corridor outside, which she had not expected. He had removed the formal hat and was standing with it under his arm, which made him look slightly more like the person she had come to know over 3 weeks, and slightly less like the dress uniform version of himself. He turned when he heard the door. "You were in the back," he said. "Habit," she said. "You going to break it?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Probably not entirely," she said, "but maybe I'll stand 1 row closer." He almost smiled. The corners of his eyes moved. They walked down the corridor together, not toward anywhere in particular, just walking, the way people walked when they had things that needed to be said and weren't quite ready to say them in a static room. "I want to ask you something," Emma said. "Go ahead. When you arrived here, the first week, you read my file before you met me." "Yes. And you saw the service record, the combat rotations, Kandahar." "Yes." She kept walking. "Did you come to this posting specifically because of any of that?" Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I came to this posting because I was offered it, and it seemed like it needed what I had to offer," he said. "When I read your file afterward, I understood better what I meant by that." Emma thought about that. "You couldn't have known what was happening here." "No, but I know what these environments produce sometimes. I've been in enough of them." He glanced at her briefly. "I know what it looks like when someone exceptional is being made to feel ordinary by people who aren't paying close enough attention." She stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned. She looked at him in the way she had not allowed herself to look at him in the hallways, in the meetings, in the track sessions. Directly, fully, without the professional distance she maintained as a matter of discipline. "What you did in the mess hall," she said, "the first time, and then the ceremony. You changed something here that I wasn't going to be able to change by myself. I want you to know that I understand what that cost." He looked at her steadily. "It didn't cost me anything." "Publicly centering a sergeant over junior enlisted who had been on base longer than you, in your first month, that has a cost. People read those decisions." "Let them read it," he said simply. "I'm comfortable with what it says." She nodded slowly. "I know you are," she said. That's what made it matter. They stood in the corridor in the easy, comfortable silence that had become theirs over the last 3 weeks, built from early mornings and track sessions and coffee on the ground and a shared understanding of what it meant to do the right thing in the absence of applause for it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go back to work," he said. "Same as always, except the people around you finally know who they're working with. And you?" He smiled then, fully actually, the first time she had seen his face produce the unconstrained version of it. "I go back to work, same as always." She looked at him for one more moment. "Good," she said. She turned and walked back toward the trauma bay, her left leg doing what it always did, the metal sitting small and solid against her chest, the corridor opening ahead of her into the ordinary, extraordinary work of the rest of the day. 3 weeks later, Medic First Class James Park ran his first solo trauma intake. A real one, not a simulation, a construction accident with 2 patients and a compromised airway, and everything happening at once. He moved through it with the steady, knowledgeable precision of someone who had been taught by a person who had learned these things under fire. When it was over, he found Emma at the nurse's station and said, "I knew what to do." "I know," she said, "because of you." She looked at him for a moment. "Because of you too," she said. "You put in the hours. I just showed you where to look." That was what she believed. That was what she had always believed, that the knowledge passed between people who chose to pass it was a form of survival that didn't make the news and didn't earn medals and was the most important work that any of them did. Danny Rourke transferred to a different unit 4 months later. Before he left, he submitted a formal, professional development recommendation for Sergeant Emma Fields to the Regional Medical Command, citing her clinical performance, her training methodology, and her ability to develop junior personnel under pressure. He filed it through proper channels. He did not tell Emma he was doing it. She found out 6 weeks after he'd gone, when the recommendation produced a formal inquiry from Regional Command about her interest in a senior training instructor position. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she said yes. The panel review remained in the administrative record, closed, unfounded, case dismissed, the way such things remained, a permanent footnote that told anyone who looked the entire story in a single line. Every medic who cycled through the unit in the years that followed heard about Emma Fields before they met her. Not the document, not the complaint, but the mess hall, the track, the ceremony. The woman who had walked these corridors for 14 months while people looked at her leg and missed everything that mattered, until one morning a SEAL captain with 22 years of service and a clear, unhesitating sense of what was right looked up from the wrong end of a hallway and chose, without calculation and without ceremony, to see her correctly. Emma kept the photograph on the shelf. She still pressed her palm against her thigh on cold mornings before the alarm was done. She still walked the corridors with her uneven gait, purposeful, consistent, without apology. Her leg never stopped aching. She never stopped moving. And in the end, when everything else was added and subtracted, and the accounting was done honestly, that was the whole of it. That was the truth the medal could only gesture toward, and the salute could only symbolize, and the words in the ceremony could only approximate. Some people bent under the weight of what the world decided they were. Emma Fields had never once decided to be what the world had decided she was. She had decided, on a dirt road in Kandahar, with the sky tilted sideways and the ground beneath her solid and real, that she was going to get up, and she had gotten up, and she had kept going, and she always would.